line. So anyone who misses it, if you miss a class, it is at youtube.com/TSB Live, Temple Children of Bridgewater, right? So TSB Live on YouTube. And that's true for most classes that we have. Whenever I remember, we hit they're recorded. Morning. So with that, I think we get to launch in. Yes? Yes. The bracha for Torah study is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We get to dive into the book of Ruth. I hope everyone had a happy and a safe Thanksgiving.
Rabbi, two questions before we begin.
Wait a second. I'm going to mute everybody else, Jerry, and then unmute you. I think let me try this. Mute everybody so that it's all right. Go ahead.
What do we know about the status of arranged marriage at the time of Ruth? That's question one. And secondly, what do we know about the status of dowry at that time?
So with regard to like the exact period of Ruth, say, it's hard to say anything outside of what is in the text itself, because because the laws or rules or practices, whatever term is most proper, regarding these practices seems to have been somewhat fluid. That's apparent even for things that have what we think of as like black letter laws. You mean that there's a verse in the Torah, you have to do this. Even those things aren't being done seemingly to the letter of what the Torah says. So all the more so for things that are not like set out in the Torah and are like quote unquote just custom minhag to begin with, like dowry and arrangement of marriage, like all the more so those things we can't speak to with precision. We can only talk to with sort of like a general sense of things that were done at that time. So that's the beginning of an evasive answer. It seems that the general practice in Israel was that marriages were arranged in the sense of families made arrangements for their children, and that each potential partner had a right of refusal. They were able to say no if meaning that if she didn't want to get married, she didn't have to get married. This isn't Seitel where she's all but forced into it. Like I'm sure there was social pressure. Like she could say no in theory. So that's thing one. In terms of like arrangements, meaning that definitely families make arrangements, but it seems that she, and then all the more so one would assume he, has the right to not if she wants to say no. And then for dowry, it seems to be part of it's an assumed part of the of life, though generally speaking, it seems that in cases where she doesn't have, often the community sort of like helps provide that. That's part of the social safety net, is that poor brides are are provided for by by communal funds, by donations and taxes and the like. Is that your question, Jared?
Yes, thank you.
All right. So which uh and the first part of that, the law part is really important. And I reference this if you watch on Tuesday night in terms of halacha. There's this piece in a book that I just read that really was somewhat mind blowing for me, and that this crowd or some people in this crowd may like the which is to say this was Joshua Berman, who I mentioned is a uh, Orthodox scholar who works at Bar-Ilan University, which is the center of like intellectual modern orthodoxy in Israel. And he says, and this is like an archaeological note that again, like this crowd sort of often is into. He's like that scholars often compare the Torah to the Code of Hammurabi in the sense of like these are our ancient law codes from the Middle East. He's like, but what people tend to miss about Hammurabi's code, even in the name Hammurabi's code, is that we've found it in multiple places, always in the palace, different pieces and parts of it always in the palace, and it's didactic. It says, like when this happens, then this. When this, then this. This, then this. Somebody steals something, then the punishment is X. If somebody, God forbid, rape somebody, the punishment is Y. Whatever it might be, right? He's like, but we never find any scrap of Hammurabi's code in any local courtroom settings, or like if they're judging in the gates. It's always in the palace and never in more localized settings where judges would have actually been doing judging. He says, and his take is that's because Hammurabi's code is not Hammurabi's code. It's Hammurabi, but it's not a code. It's not a code of law the way we think of a code of law. It's statutory law, where the statute is, if you get caught smoking something you shouldn't, then the punishment is X. It's not a code like that. He says that Hammurabi's code is misnamed, that it's a collection of common law precedents. That these are things that like people did, and then they would report that they did it. And so it's just sort of a collection of this happened. Oh, when somebody stole something, the punishment was X. And in a common law system, you always look to the precedent of what had happened, but it doesn't tie your hands precisely in terms of what should happen, as opposed to in a statutory system where Congress passes a law and then you have to enforce it this way. In a common law system, it's just a little there's more leeway present. He says that the fact that there's no that it's not locally is on purpose. That's just a collection of precedents. He says the Torah is born out of the same culture where we think of it as a statutory system, like it's the Constitution, when really it's more of a common law system. And so when you have a law in Exodus that's contradicted in Deuteronomy, it's not because Deuteronomy is contradicting Exodus, which is what scholars have long said, that this is from one source and this is from another source. He's an Orthodox thinker. He says this is all the same source, but the law in Exodus was for the people in the desert. The law in Deuteronomy is for the people about to enter the land of Israel. And so, because it's different, as in a common law system, you can just apply the law differently. And the example he actually cites is in Ruth. In Ruth, the law of Yibum, the law of levirate marriage, is practiced differently than it is in the law in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy sets out a law, and the book of Ruth doesn't follow it. And scholars have always said, this is evidence that the authors of the book of the Ruth don't know the book of Deuteronomy because they're doing it differently. He says this is his Orthodox take, though in his saving orthodoxy, he makes it more of what I think of as conservative, which is why I'm saying it. He's like, it's not that the book of Ruth doesn't know about Deuteronomy. He says is that Deuteronomy is part of a common law system And at the time of Deuteronomy, like levirate marriage, yibum, like this, marrying when your husband dies childless, and then you have to marry the relative, thing like in the time of Deuteronomy, it worked this way. But in the time of Ruth, it worked this way. And one doesn't contradict the other. It's just in different social situations, you can apply the law differently, and you're not rejecting what came earlier. You're just working within it. In a common law system, the precedent is a datum from which to reason, It's just a point. So as long as Ruth is aware of the book of Ruth, is aware of the law in Deuteronomy, it can apply it in the way that it thinks is relevant for its situation. So he says this from an Orthodox perspective to like try and say that, oh, like there's no different authors and things like this. But in so doing, it is really like opening the door for almost the way that conservative communities practice Judaism and understand halacha and understand the halakhic system. So that was my reading of recent weeks, and it was fascinating and totally relevant to Ruth in that he has a theory and like sort of like how all this stuff works. And now, back to our regularly scheduled text. Chapter 2, Book of Ruth. I don't know if that made sense to anyone, but it was fascinating to me. Thank you, Rana. Chapter 2. So this is, we left, I think we start with chapter 2. When we last left Ruth, she and Naomi were walked back to Bethlehem, and they arrive in Bethlehem together, and all of the women gather around and are very gossipy. Can this be Naomi? Or like however we want to say, like, could this be Naomi? Whatever it is. And she says, do not call me Naomi, call me Mara. Naomi meaning pleasant, Noam. Darachecha darche Noam. Naomi meaning pleasant, Naomi Mara meaning bitter. There's still people named Mara. Sort of a beautiful name, but I don't know if I'd want to be named bitter. For Shaddai has made my lot very bitter. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. And this is, of course, the moment where I imagine Ruth in the background saying, right here, not empty, loyal friend. How can you call me Naomi when the Lord has dealt harshly with me, when Shaddai has brought misfortune upon me? Thus Naomi returned from the country of Moab. She returned with her daughter-in-law Ruth, the Moabite. They arrived in Beit Lechem at the beginning of the barley harvest. That's the transition to chapter 2. So, chapter 2. Ulanomi modeh lisha ish gibor chayil mishpachat Elimelech shmo Boaz. Now Naomi had a kinsman on her husband's side, a man of substance of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. Now, kinsman is relative, is how JPS translate, is how Alter translates. Not everyone translates that way. Some translate acquaintance. Rashi understands it to mean relative. Some translate acquaintance. I actually found, this was Karen's book. I was going through the bookshelves and I found this from URJ Press that was Karen's copy that I've forgot we owned. So I have an extra resource now. They translate acquaintance as moda. Moda like could mean acquaintance, like somebody who you know. So it could be a relative, could be acquaintance. Either way. Gibor Chayil also. Gibor Chayil is JPS translates man of substance. Alter understands that a man of worth, which is a similar phrase. These guys translate an important person. The phrase in Chronicles means like soldier, but here it clearly means something of a man of worth, parallel to Eshet Chayil, right? Woman of 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 worth or significance. Here, it's clearly in a not in a familial context; it's a public context that he's an important guy in town. From the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. The We never learn exactly what the relation of Boaz to Elimelech is. We know he's a relative. We don't know exactly how he's related. It seems that the relation must be somewhat distant because the relation is never stated straight out. Meaning, if you're a brother or a cousin or something like that, that's a term that you would throw out easily. So the fact that it's never quite stated indicates that it's probably somewhat distant, though the Talmud thinks that uh, that he's a nephew, that
Rabbi,
Boaz Elimelech's nephew. Yep. Oh,
Art,
our school's going to help us out here, aren't they?
Art Scroll.
Baruch Hashem.
Boaz was the son of one of Elimelech's brothers, but I guess they quote Rashi on that.
Right, Rashi. Right. So our school is quoting Rashi, who's quoting the Talmud. Talmud says that it's a nephew. The Talmud also says, I learned this morning, is that Elimelech himself was the son of none other than Nachshon ben Aminadav. Nachshon, you remember, midrashically, is the one who bravely stepped into the Red Sea when the people are at the edge of the Red Sea, and Moses says, "Go in," and everyone's standing there looking at each other, being like, "You know that's a sea, right?" That Nachshon's the one who stepped in, and when he shows that level of faith and believing in Moses and in God, that when he steps into the sea, then the sea splits. So that's Nachshon, and the Talmud also says that's a relation. Why they say that, I'm not quite sure, but that's it's a fun midrash because you get to tell the story of Nachshon again. Boaz, because there's interest here in making sure that we in that name. His name was Boaz. Alter notes the meaning of the name is not altogether transparent. It may not be meant to be symbolic. A tradition going back to late antiquity associated with the Hebrew root meaning strength should be oz, right? Bo-oz, like there is strength in him. So that's our hint. This guy's important. Coming up, we're going to lead into the story of Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go pray to the field and glean from among the ears of grain after I find favor in his eyes." And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." Piece by piece. This is the second time since the great speech of "where you go, I will go, and your people be my people," and all of this, that the narrator calls her Ruth the Moabite, right? Even after all of that, notice she's not now called Ruth the Israelite or Ruth the convert or anything like this. She's still Ruth the Moabite. That presumably here that's for narrative reasons, that everyone's going to see her this way. So she's still an outsider going to is in unfamiliar territory. So she says, "Let me go pray," means she recognizes Naomi as the one in charge. "To the field and glean from among the ears of grain after I find favor in his eyes." So notice there's a few things going on here. One, as a few folks around here have mentioned, maybe Naomi's thing is that she's has some level of depression going on, or something that we would characterize this way. In her silence to Ruth's wonderful speech, and in her "don't call me Naomi, call me the bitter one because I am empty, I have nothing," the speech to the townswomen. And now they're home in their new home and they need food. And notice that it's Ruth who's the one going out to say, I'm gonna go to the field, and again, it's not necessary, but one possibility is that they're sitting around and there's no food, and Naomi, in her Black state, is sort of like unable to like to get up and to do anything. And so Ruth is the one who's like, I'm gonna go get food, right? That could be what's going on. And how do you get food if you have no money? This we know. This is something that seems to be, again, like applied from the laws of the Torah. Repeatedly in the Torah, it says, leave the gleanings for the poor, the widow, the stranger in your midst. And guess what? Ruth has the hat trick on this one, right? She's poor. She's a stranger. Again, stranger always means immigrant, somebody from somewhere else who isn't your ethnicity, right? So she's poor, she's a stranger, and of course she's a widow. So the gleanings are there for her. This is the social safety net of ancient Israelite society. When you're going through the fields, you can't pick up what you drop. If you go through once, and if you drop it, or if you forget it, or if you missed it, it stays there for the poor. And that's just it's a tax essentially on the landowners to create a natural social safety net for the poor, for the widow, for the stranger in their midst. That the four corners of the field also have to be left, of course. But that's just it. So again, sort of this wonderful system where there's food provided. There's but it's both freely given, and also the receiver has to work for it, right? You don't sit and wait for your check to come. Ruth has to go out and glean, so she has to do the work for it. But in another sense, it's provided to her. So she has permission because she's a junior partner in the relationship. Let me go pray to the field and glean from among the ears of grain after I find favor in his eyes. Now, this is one of the odd parts that may be somewhat, this could be a social note. If it's a legal note, then it's worth keeping in mind that common law versus statutory law thing, because of course, in the Torah, you don't have to find favor in somebody's eyes, meaning that if he likes me, then I get to take it. It's free for everyone, meaning the poor, the widow, the stranger get to take it, whether you like them or not. They get to take it, period. So here, it's not necessary that she find favor in his eyes, which is the biblical phrase for if you think well of me. Like if you look at in the Torah very frequently, in Abraham's negotiating with over the cave of Machpelah for a burial site for Sarah, if in the negotiation for Rebecca to consent to becoming Isaac's wife, this phrase in the Joseph and his brothers negotiations, frequently you find this phrase, if I find favor in your eyes. Moses will use it a lot like this. So finding favor in somebody's eyes means what it obviously means, like just that somebody think well of you. But it's a very, very frequently used biblical phrase. An Alter's comment here is a good one. Ruth exercises a kind of nervous reticence in regard to Naomi's prosperous relative, who has no doubt been pointed out to her by her mother-in-law, not mentioning him by name. She realizes she will be dependent on Boaz's goodwill, and so says she will not glean until he has shown himself favorable toward her. In the event, she begins gleaning before that happens. So again, she doesn't seem to need to say it, but there's sort of like, there might be a little nervousness in what she's saying.
So, Rabbi,
Yep.
You have made reference to statutory law and common law a couple of times in this conversation. So was there something in those days that represented a legislature or a court of law that would have created either statutes or common laws?
Well, that's sort of that's the way that historically Jews have assumed that the Torah worked, meaning that the Torah like isn't like sort of like isn't the Torah the Constitution that you have to apply as written. The judges have to apply as written. The judges in every community, the judges who are appointed in every community would have to do this, right? So the Deuteronomy says, you have to appoint judges for, in appellate courts and all these other sorts of things. Like so they have a system of judges, and we know, and the Deuteronomy says, the king has to have a copy of the Torah and things like this, and the Torah has to be read to the public regularly, things like this. So the assumption always was that the laws of the Torah are the law, and the judges then are to apply it. So not a legislature as such, but legislation in the form of Torah law. The common law thing is just that, well, it's not legislation as much as it is precedent, and you decide whether that precedent, like what I'm suggesting, or what Rabbi Berman suggesting, is that it's just precedent, and the judge decides, does that apply here or not? Or the society applies, does that apply here or not? So she goes out to the field. And Naomi says, go, my daughter, right? L'chi biti, right? So maybe this, by the way, notice the warmer tone that Naomi has here. Whereas a moment ago she was arriving alone in Bethlehem. Now they're sort of like in their shared home, whatever that is, and she refers to Ruth as BT, as my daughter. ותלך ותבוא ותלקט, תלך ותבוא ותלקט בשדה אחרי הכתרים. And she went and she came and she gleaned in a field behind the reapers. And as luck would have it, there was a piece of land belonging to Boaz, who was of Elimelech's family. Right? So she goes out, she can go, she of course has rights to go to any field, but sort of like she seems that she's planning to go to Boaz's field. But as it happens, she in fact is in Boaz's field. Verse 2 seems to think that's a little more of a coincidence than verse 1, or verse 3 than verse 2 thinks it is. And notice again, like, so she's gleaning behind the reapers. That's sort of like the sort of thing. Like I always sort of like, you can imagine it that somebody could come the next day, but really she's like behind the reapers, meaning that the employees are going through gleaning the field, and she's literally behind them, picking up what they dropped or what they missed. And presumably part of a group of people that are doing this. The poor are sort of like, you sort of picture them like waiting for the actual employees to go through, and the poor follow them as they do so.
Rabbi, could it be that she was nervous because she is a Moabite? The Israelites have not looked favorably on the Moabites, and she does not know. She's doing something that is in their tradition. She doesn't know how she is going to be received.
Well, look, I think that is totally, like, she's again maybe nervous. She's never done it before. She's nervous. She's in a new place. She's nervous. She is from the despised ethnic group. So yeah, so definitely she has. There's good reason why she would be on edge. And it's sort of striking that Naomi doesn't go with her. Again, sort of like suggested reasons why that might be, but yes, there's definitely reasons why she would be nervous. And her very ethnicity is part of it. She goes and gleans. The word for gleaning is the word for gleanings, and for gleaning is from the source leket. The and even now, a nice group to donate to in Israel is called Leket Israel. So if the law of Leket is the law of the gleanings, that you have to leave food over for the poor. There's an organization less than 20 years old, I think, called Leket Israel, that collects all of the unused food from restaurants and grocery stores and distributes it to those with what often is called food insecurity, right? Like for those who don't have enough. So it is a great example of a direct application of the ancient law to a modern situation. And like you could so if collecting from the field is sort of like comparatively difficult in this mechanized era, collecting from restaurants and grocery stores less so. So they take that leket, those gleanings, what's been left over, and distribute it to the poor. So Leket Israel, easily found online, totally good organization.
Rabbi?
Yep.
When we went to Israel, we went with them to actually pick what was left over, what the farmers couldn't. What happens is the farmers can't finish picking everything. They don't have the means or the money to pay people to do it. So it's left. And as I said, when we were in Israel, we did two things with them on two separate occasions. On one, we actually went and we picked kohlrabi, which was interesting, all of us picking kohlrabi. And another time we went, when we went on the mission, we actually went and helped sort the food, these vegetables and these beets and things in their big facility, sorted everything so that they could pack it up and give it out to people.
Right. So exactly it. The link here. So totally good organization. The link here. Like it. Yeah. So thanks. Yeah. That's what they do, and that's and it's a good principle to have. Good word to know. Verse so came on the plot of Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. The narrator wants to make sure we know. And look, Boaz was coming from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, "May the Lord be with you." And they said, "May the Lord bless you." Right. The sort of we're getting a little introduction to Elimelech. Boaz to Boaz. Boaz Beit Lechem. He's coming from Beit Lechem, which again tells you that this is like a field on the edge of town, right? Like he lives in town, and his field is the on the outskirts. There's a tradition that we've encountered before of the first thing that a character says when you meet them tells you something about their personality, right? If you remember with David, the first thing that David says in the Tanakh was when the soldiers are gathered around, like looking at Goliath, who's taunting them. As Goliath taunts them, saying that who's strong enough to go with me, and the soldiers are like, this is really scary. But the one who defeats Goliath will get riches, and the king will offer his daughter's hand to. David's first words are, "What will happen to the man who defeats Goliath?" Like David, who will prove to be always on the make in search of fame and women, the first thing he says is an indication of his interest in fame and women. So or the first time we meet Moses as an adult, he's interested in justice, right? So Boaz, we meet him, and the first thing he does is he greets his laborers, which is really nice, right? He's not a plutocrat who doesn't care about his workers. But like as soon as he arrives on the scene, he both greets his workers, which is nice, and he also greets him by saying Hashem imechem, right? The first word out of his mouth is God's name. The first word out of his mouth is Yud Hey Vav Hey, right? So he's put forward as a pious and thoughtful individual, even just by the fact that he's greeting his workers and he's greeting them literally with God's name. Hashem imechem, may God be with you. Ve'emru Yivrecha Hashem, and they say back to him, may God bless you, right? Everyone's using Yud Hey Vav Hey here, right? Like so, so from the beginning, Boaz, nice guy. Boaz says to his lad, who was stationed over the reapers, "Who is this young woman?" The lad stationed over the reapers answered and said, "She's a young Moabite woman who has come back from Naomi from the plains of Moab." And she said, "Let me glean, pray, and gather from among the sheaves behind the reapers." And she has come and stood since the morning till now. She has barely stayed in the house. So pause there a second. So the Boaz again seems to be aware of what's going on. His says to his servant, it's a na'ar, right? The same word that we find in any number of positions, sort of like a young male assistant. He's the supervisor of the field hand, and so it's fascinating. Lemi na'ara azot. Whose girl is that? Is how JPS translates it. The Alter translates, "Whose is this young woman?" But like the key, sort of a key phrase here is the whose. It's not who is this young woman. It's whose. So the JPS comment on that is, in the biblical world, this question was equivalent to asking, to what household does this person belong? In the ancient world, all persons were reckoned as members of an extended family household or larger scale group. The queried servant understands the question in those terms. This is the first of three questions as to who Ruth is. So notice it'll be in 3:5, 3:8, 3:16. Boaz's question helps to link this narrative to other biblical stories. For Abraham's servant, 2 weeks ago in the parasha, asked the Na'ara, the young girl, Rebecca as well, "Whose daughter are you?" Likewise, this resembles a query that King Saul poses instantly with regard to David, the descendant of Ruth and Boaz. Whose son is that boy, that Na'ar? So there are presumably a lot of people gleaning. She's not the only one in the field. So our question in part is, why does Boaz ask about her specifically? There are a few possibilities. One is there could be like a usual crowd that comes around gleaning, right? That you recognize the gleaners because they're there every day or every season or every whatever, like every time this happens, that there's sort of a usual group of gleaners, and there's a new one. So he notices the new one. That's one. She could be the most beautiful person there. That certainly is a possibility. That is often sort of in the Tanakh, that is not, and in the world, that is not uncommonly what catches someone's eye, that she's just the most beautiful one. So he's like, whoop. So he's sort of like whose girl is that? Like in that sense. The Talmud, does ArtScroll give a comment here, Alan? There's a great traditional comment on this. The
When Boaz noticed her modesty, he inquired about her.
oh, that's how they translate.
Yes.
So that's reading Rashi into the translation. I think there's Rashi here coming.
I'm sorry, it just says midrash.
Oh, in the midrash, yeah.
Yeah.
So when he noticed her modesty, so normally what one might think is that her beauty caught his eye. The midrash will be yes. Ruth is very beautiful, but it's her modesty, which is to say, I sort of like this one because it's well, you'll figure out why I find it like this one. It's because you don't always know these things. I don't always get to teach stuff like this, but it's right there in the tradition. So what Rashi says, what the Talmud says, is that what catches Boaz's eye is how modest she is. What's her modesty? She's gleaning. What's part of the gleaning? Picking stuff up off the ground. So the other women bent over to pick stuff up off the ground. Ruth bent her knees and knelt modestly, because for a beautiful woman, we'll leave it like this. Ruth, what caught his eye? She wasn't bending over immodestly. She knelt to pick up what was on the ground. Now, I didn't live in the time of the Talmud, so I don't know if this was just like a general thing that people knew, but like that's one of the that is what when Art Scroll says he noticed her modesty, that's what they're referring. That's the midrash that they're referring to, and I never get to say it on Shavuot when we read this, but so I wasn't going to lose the opportunity to miss it now. There's Ruth for you, and that also tells you about the Jewish tradition, right? I don't know. Don't imagine that the comparative coarseness of our society and the objectification of women specifically is new to us. It takes different forms in every generation, but I feel like that very comment is telling that while the ideal is something, like there's certainly it shows an awareness of other attitudes out there.
So, Rabbi,
Yeah.
I had a slightly less disturbing thought about that. So, when he finds out that she's come with Naomi and that she's a Moabite, is it possible that he's thinking there may be some family connection?
It could be, yes. I mean, certainly, if he is whatever level of relative from, or since he is whatever level of relative from Elimelech, like he doesn't need to be said. It's not like, oh, he's not saying which Naomi. So, he's been in town, so he probably picks her out because she's, again, either new or beautiful, the midrash notwithstanding. So he he probably he may be aware that he's certainly aware there's somebody new. He may be aware that there's been somebody new that just came to town with Naomi, who's his relative, or who's connected to him in some way, shape, or form. So certainly there could be this sense. Maybe she again looks different. Maybe she's wearing like Moabite clothes in a way that is different from people dress differently in Midtown Manhattan than they do in Midtown Kenosha, right? Like there's even if it's similar, right? Like you sort of like, so she may be wearing clothes that like indicate her Provence. Also striking, by the way, is the use of na'ara, which is normally for a woman who is it can mean girl, like it can mean like like a pre like uh, a young girl, um, and it could and sometimes it has a shading like up to teenager, but of course like Ruth has been married for 10 years. Um, it's hard to imagine her being younger than her mid to late 20s, right? Like so she's sort of like hardly a na'ara, but um, that the modesty, by the way, is the as JPS notes, it's the Talmud is trying to save Boaz, really, because like they're like the uh Rashi and the Talmud are like, did Boaz like ask about girls? Like, is this who the Boaz is? Like, no. It's just that she's like stood out in her modesty. The so she's poor. Notes that she's a stranger. She's the one who came back with Naomi. Um, the and the servant quotes her as sort of being polite, right? That she politely asked permission to glean, and also notes, right, like and she has come and stood since morning till night. She's barely stayed in the house, meaning that she's um, she's picking them up, and she's working super hard, like she's been working all day, and she barely stayed in the house. Which is Alter notes that his translation is little more than a guess. She has rested but little in the hut is how uh, uh, is how it's translated in JPS. Also, they say that they're guessing, which seems to be that there's either a she can return to like the main house to rest, or that there's like a little hut out there, a sukkah of some sort like that you can rest in over the course of the day while you're gleaning. So she works really hard. So now Boaz, verse 8, goes over to speak with her. Vayomer Boaz al Ruth, halo shamat biti, al telchi leket basada acher, v'gam lo ta'avori mizeh v'ko tevekin im naroti. Boaz says to Ruth, have you not heard, my daughter? Do not go and glean in another field, and also do not pass on from here, and so shall you cling to my young women. Which is to say, like once he hears that she's connected to Naomi, he says there's a warmth to the phrase, as he says shmat, like listen to me. And calls her BT, like Naomi just did, my daughter, which is both nice but also implies an age difference. Which and the don't go elsewhere can be either do what I say, or like a literal sense of like, you're connected to me, so you never have reason to go to another field to glean. Stay here. Stay close. When he says stay close to my girls, like could also like be the sense of like, look, you're a lovely young woman who has no man in her life protecting her. Stay with the people. Stay with the people who are connected to me. And probably like the most direct sense of this is for your own protection. You shouldn't be out there rolling around on your own. That's dangerous. Stay with my folks when you're in, as if you're in my clan, which will offer you like sort of as a young protectorless woman, the security you need in this society. That seems to be what he's saying. So there's a couple of things going on here. One, I'll provide for you. Two, it's a cruel world out there. How about you don't go out into it? And I think that's and I think that's actually sort of like what's going on. He uses the same word davek, stick to, that Ruth used for Naomi. Boaz uses to her, stick to my girls, stay in their group. Keep your eyes on the field that they are reaping and follow them. I have ordered the men not to molest you. And when you are thirsty, go to the jars and drink some of the water that the men have drawn. Right. So that's a JPS translation. Alter goes with, have I not charged the lads not to touch you? So you can either, whether he's saying it the way Alter does as a question or the way JPS has as a statement, the effect is the same. The question that Alter uses is obviously a rhetorical question. Naga. Touch. It could here it seems to be like, again, like what I said, like he's concerned for her well-being. He's offering her protection. There are men around. They're responsible to me. They've been ordered not to touch you. That's part of why she shouldn't be going elsewhere. And when you need water, go take it. You don't have to draw the water. The water is drawn for you, and you can just follow everyone else in terms of the in terms of what's going on. In terms of getting the food. So it might be that might be a good place to pause, I think. But it's a Boaz here, notice, is sort of comes off as a thoughtful, decent man, which is to say, not everybody in the Tanakh comes off as a thoughtful, decent man. Boaz really does. From the first, like, he seems to care about his workers. He seems to understand the precariousness of a situation of somebody not like himself. She's in Ruth is vulnerable, and he seems to take the attitude of, I don't even know that you know how vulnerable a situation you're in. Or maybe it could be that, again, like sort of in that opening sentence when she and Naomi, when she's like, Naomi, I can go out and get food. Like I sort of, again, picture them sitting on the couch staring at each other, wondering who's going to do this. Maybe they needed, like, who knows if time passed and like she was nervous, like, I'm a Moabite, nobody's been, like, all these things that went in that might have made her slow to react. And Boaz both seems to be doing this because there's a relation aspect, meaning the connection with Avimelech, but also he just seems to be a decent person who doesn't want the vulnerable to be preyed upon. He's a mensch. So Boaz, tough not to be a fan of Boaz.
Rabbi, isn't there also some kind of comparison to Rebecca? Rebecca took care of the foreigners that came to the well. Here, Boaz is taking care of a foreigner with a well. Yes,
definitely so. The wells are like they're the watering hole. They're the gathering places of the day. So yes, absolutely. And in each case, the word na'ara. In each case, Rebecca is specifically described as a na'ara, which means the rabbis place her at age 3. She's a pretty precocious 3-year-old. And here Na'ara is the word used for Ruth, who ain't three. The so yeah. So definitely, there's sort of links on the stories. But good. It's a nice scene. Some there's so he's there's not much to say, like other than like that he comes off as a good guy, and that she's fortunate to have decided to seek him out, as the story will progress with. She's kind to Naomi, and her kindness is rewarded with Boaz. That's part of the Midah Keneged Midah. Just like in our stories that we read in the Torah, Jacob's deception will land him he deceives his father, and then he as a father will be deceived, and things like that. Ruth is kind, and her kindness is met with kindness. Just like Jacob's deception is met with deception, Ruth's kindness is met with kindness.